Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Southampton, part of the Global Sports Podcast Network. My name is Greg Elliott, and as always, joined by my good friend and wonderful co-host, Zach Ingo-Finch. How you doing today, mate?
Yeah, not too bad. I've got some sort of lurg, which I'm not a fan of, but solidly.
This just the starting to get ready for prepping for Saints playing again next week, right? Like,
Just
start to feel rubbish,
feel
coming
physically ill now, and then feel better by that point. That's me and my wonderful wife have been starting to go to the gym a little bit more, and it is an inevitable consequence of, like, you know, I think you mentioned it when I was talking to you earlier. It's basically just like fresh as flu, right? You start going outside to a place a bit more, so it'll be what it'll be. But yeah, it just means that head's a bit of a wreck for today, but it'll be fine.
Yes, well, we are still in the midst or at the tail end of this international break coming back to club football. And speaking of feeling sick, Zach, several people have made comment on what we mentioned yesterday of our rumoured valuation of Tyler Dibling at £100 million. So we thought today we'd have a little chat about transfer money. And yeah, 100 million?
This is the thing, right? We kind of discussed it yesterday. You're right, it is mad, and for an unproven 18-year-old, it's a lot. But like, we could charge what we want. Like, I could have an apple in my house for, you know, just put out on the street and say you can buy it for me. It's £20, and people's like, that's insane. You're right, it's an insane price. If you pay the £20, you get the apple. If you don't get the apple. That's the entire point. Like, it's a deterrent, right? Clearly, they want to keep him. They are under no obligation to sell him. He has a contract extension clause, whether he likes it or not. If somebody decides that they're going to bid ridiculous money for it, you know, saying it's just wheeling dealing. It's all tricks of the trade, right? It's not. I don't think it's like a stamped on thing. But also,
No.
I would be surprised if some clubs pay it. Like, you've seen the money that's moved around places like Saudi Arabia. Like, 100 million isn't what it used to be, is it? You know?
No, maybe, and yeah, we're going to talk about that a bit later in the episode for sure. But you're right; it's like a line in the sand. It's like we don't need to sell him, and if you want him, you're going to pay this money because that's what we want for him. It's what he's worth to us, and therefore, if he's worth that to you, you'll pay it. So it's interesting, and obviously, it comes with like English tax as well, right? Because he's a homegrown, home-developed player. And you know, there's something to be said for English players getting more hype anyway in England.
You hit the nail on the head, mate. Which is that it's that's what he is currently worth to the club. If people think the valuation is insane, don't pay it. Then that's fine. We're not going to be upset either way. If he stays, I'll be over the moon. If he goes, I'm not going to be devastated if we make a good profit out of him. If we put his valuation at 15 million and then somebody comes in with a bid for 8 and then we sell him for 8, I think a lot of people are going to be annoyed and upset about that, you know?
Yeah.
So it just makes a lot of sense to me that, you know, we would put a high valuation on something that we see as a high value player. So yeah, I'm not really surprised. And I think that, but I understand that if you are looking at it as without putting too much thought into it, it is a really, really high number because in comparison to what some of the other players have done this season, like, you know, out and about and around for sort of not just even our club, elsewhere.
It was a couple of years ago we saw Declan Rice cost £100 million. So are we saying that? I'm sure that Tyler Dibling has the potential to be as good as Declan Rice. Do you think in his current state he's the same £100 million that Arsenal paid for Declan Rice? No.
Is there anything, especially it's like anything, right? Like, he's young, we don't know where his career is going to go. He could have a career-ending injury. There's so many factors you need to involve, right? And you know, he's been a bright spark for us this season. It's been something to look forward to. It's something great to watch. It's nice to watch an academy player break into the first team. But it's the same thing where, like, directly after the Liverpool game, after Paul Onuachu did a few stepovers, people all of a sudden found out who he was, and you probably could have slapped a 30 million price tag on him there and then. If you'd sold him the next day, some people would probably say it's good business, while the rest of us are going, it's kind of crazy. It's just I think this is just the way that valuations go. It's all a game. It's all to put it out into the rumor mill. If it's somebody somewhere has wanted us to think that that is how much that he was worth, and to have that conversation and debate, if it's to generate more talk about it that puts the price up, or if it's the agents trying to disrupt stuff, like you don't really know. Just whenever anything like this appears in the media, just asks who wants it there, right? Like no one's coming up with a random story off the top of their head. Like I could just make up stuff off the cuff. Yukidari Sugawara is a really good player, 50 million, right? And then if I publish that in some sort of piece of journalism, people go wild. But it's just a number plucked out of the sky, and that might be what it is. It could be a number plucked out of the sky, and it could be there to drive up the price. It could be there to start a conversation. It could be there for a number of reasons, but I think the problem is that the reason it's getting confusing is that, if you had a £1 billion release clause, right, it'd be a different conversation completely. No one would ever expect them to sort of hit that. But the thing is that people have paid very recently, as you've pointed out with Declan Rice, £100 million for players. Yeah. So people start to think it's like an actual realistic thing that's going to happen. And then they're like, "Were you actually expecting 100 million?" It's like, no, but there's probably someone out there that might pay that for an 18-year-old, because that is where we live in football. Right, I've talked a lot, mate. So
I've got several points I want to touch on, feeding directly off that. But this seems like, before I get into that, a very good, logical place to break for a second and hear from our sponsors at Bioniq.
Your body is unique. And Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bioniq, the world's most personalised supplements. Bioniq provide 100% tailor-made supplements designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right levels to optimise your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN 2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bioniq. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now.
Okay, and we are back. So I want to build on that and about the market at the moment and the state of play. I want to put that in the context, because we're under heavy fire and heavy criticism this season, right? And rightly so, for the position we're in, because we've done horrendously. But we're in the same position as the other two promoted clubs, realistically, in that we're probably all going back down. And there's lots of talk about this gap, and it's really demonstrable, right? Because we're talking about how many players people have signed for £100 million here, £100 million. I put into context Declan Rice. Another example that cost £100 million was Anthony, that Oscar brought up yesterday. And now, is Tyler Dibling as good as Anthony? Yeah, easily, I'd say. Comfortably, probably better.
I think it was like 70 something, but I agree that it was just...
But then, if you put that into the context that our club record signing of all time was made this season for 24 million for Aaron Ramsdale, we're never going to be in a position to spend £100 million on a player, ever. So
does it get worse and worse?
That's why that gap exists, and that gap is only going to ever grow, right? Like,
and then the whole the idea that you then can't make it fair. I understand that financial fair play rules are supposed to be what does that, but also it's like, you've seen, it means nothing to most people. I don't understand how Chelsea have made back the money they've spent, because they have bought every single player at one point, I swear. And it just seems bizarre. It is difficult for us to compete. Yeah, you could say that we need to be smarter with our transfers, and you can say that Manchester United are paying dividends now with the consequences of their actions, right? But the problem is that now that you have 100 million and 75 million as like established prices for players, that'll only ever go up. That's just how currency works. We are not probably going to massively increase the amount that we're willing to spend, which means that every time that we get in a new player, it almost seems like it has to be a calculated risk. And we calculated real bad this season.
Exactly. And like, you look at teams like Manchester City, who are having by their terms,
Terrible
a struggling season, right? And even so, they're probably still going to qualify for the Champions League.
Mm-hmm.
But in January, it was identified they were not having a good season. They were able to go out and buy for £75 million, Mamouche, who instantly has hit this, the ground running and scored goals, and Gonzalez in midfield for 60 million. Like, that combined spend is more than we are going to spend in a total window, right?
Yeah.
Just on those two
Agreed.
players.
Agreed. It's impossible. And this is the problem: is people are like, "Oh, well, actually, you can compete if you have a plan and you do this and this." Like, look at Bournemouth, look at Brighton. I'm like, yeah, look at them in 5-6 seasons time. Look what happened to Leicester. Leicester won the Premier League. Like, yeah, okay, it's coming up on like a decade, but still, like that team was picked apart instantaneously. And then we get. I remember someone mugging us off like, "Oh, Virgil van Dijk wasn't stolen from him. You got 75 million. It was how you reinvested." I'm like, well, yeah, we wouldn't be able to turn around and buy a player for 75 million and be able to identify, so we have to kind of consistently hedge our bets. And I think that it's for the lower league, for the lower sort of tier of clubs, it's much more of a betting game than for the higher tier ones, because if there is a problem, they are able to identify and fix that straight away. We have identified problems. What have we managed to do? We brought in a guy from France on loan who, sure, he's been all right. It's never going to fix our season. What would we need to do? It's yeah, you could say it's all to do with how the clubs are run. So that our club itself, Sports Republic, are trying to run it as a profitable business, which is why they're investing a lot of money into things that people, from a football perspective, don't care about. So where can you ever get to a point where, unless somebody comes in and buys you and has a ton of capital to spare, no offense, Newcastle, what are you meant to do?
No, exactly. It's staggering, and the numbers are ridiculous. And am I saying that if we went out in the January transfer window and our only signing was this £75 million striker, that it would save our season? No, but we'd probably score some goals, right? Like,
Well, yeah, but then this is also the other thing, is that's difficult in itself, because Man City are always going to have to pay over inflated prices. So they're always going to have to put the work in to make sure that they are not risking it on a player. Although arguably you can say with people like Jack Grealish and stuff, it's not worked out to the best of their ability. But like, they are going to have better recruitment. We already had the problem where we had a plan that was pilfered because Jason Wilcox was offered more money in a different place, in a more prestigious place. So that's always going to be something that you need to contend with. But yeah, it's not, if we go in for a player at a reasonable price in Portugal for 15 million, but then, for example, Liverpool like that player and go for 50, we're never winning that fight ever. So then you kind of have to just hope that you get players that are not sort of caught yet. Like, this is why when I talk about Matias Fernandez, right? Like, it's very much sort of like I kind of want him to remain a hidden gem just for a little bit. But then I think people are starting to cotton on, because you're starting to get a lot of conversation around pundits and all that kind of stuff. And it's just, I think that it is extremely difficult to compete. And people say, well, you just need to build something up. And the problem is a lot of the people that are saying sort of that kind of stuff, especially to us, are like fans of clubs where they don't have to worry about that, because mummy and daddy will pay out if worst comes to worst. Whereas, if we financially end up ruined, it will just be like another story where we end up in the bottom tier of football. I don't know. As you can tell, I have a lot of opinions on it. I just think that even if we spent a £75 million on a striker, you're right, we probably wouldn't have got anything. Maybe we scored some goals. I also don't think we would have ever been able to, or ever we would have ever paid £75 million for a striker.
100%.
And I also think that if we came in to buy that striker, it wouldn't cost £75 million. Part of that is due to the fact that it's Manchester City. So there's lots of factors at play.
Yeah.
Lots of different factors.
It is an interesting one, and you're right. I don't think we would. I don't think we're ever going to put ourselves in a position to play that. That's just the way it is, and that unfortunately means that it is much harder. And sure, I guess the answer is right, that just because they're paying £75 million for the player doesn't mean it's going to work out either. I mean, you're right. You look at Grealish might not be a very good example. I think he does all right, but like Calvin Phillips, I think is a textbook example of paying over and above a player's worth because he was an important player where he was in the smaller pond of Leeds, and doesn't fit Pep Guardiola's playing style at all.
But also, the price point for those players going to Manchester City at 75 million doesn't matter as if we were to spend 75 million on a player. Like, it's night and day. Like, if a player doesn't work out for City that they paid 60 million for, just a drop in the ocean. If we pay for 60 million for, mate, like Chelsea's a perfect example of that. Like, did they pay like 30, 40 million for Ugachukwu? And he's on loan at currently the worst Premier League team of all time. Like, you've got Lavia who went there and is, getting better and probably has the potential, but didn't play for the whole first season he was there. No one was outcrying. It was insane they paid 55 million for a guy that didn't play. Like, that is a normal amount of money in that sort of area of the league, right? So if they pay 75 million, it doesn't work out. It doesn't matter. Like, the pressure isn't there. Whereas if we paid 50 million for somebody and it didn't work out, there would probably be a lot of pressure. It's probably one of the reasons we had a lot of pressure on Sulemana, right? Until Ramsdale, he was our all-time highest spend, and like, it wasn't working out the way that we would have expected it to. And that is just going to be the difference in disparity between teams. And that's always going to exist because you're always going to have clubs that are more prestigious and bigger than others. There's always going to be a bigger percentage of people that want to support City than there are Southampton. But if all of a sudden we were able to grow our global reputation massively by having a giant owner and get revenue from elsewhere, it becomes a problem. And also, if it had worked out for Manchester United, if Anthony had scored, if they hadn't changed manager 9 times, if they'd won the Premier League 2 or 3 years in a row, we might call the players that we decry as being too expensive bargains, because it's entirely based off of results and other things like that. One of the reasons it's such a problem is that their new owner has taken it over, looked at the finances, doesn't have the money to invest, and is like, well, this is insane, so I'm going to fire the tea lady. Just like, okay. Just it's a very messy thing, and I don't think that when you link it all into player valuations, it's not as simple as Tyler Dibling's worth 100 million quid, which again is what we started talking about. There's so much more. There's so much more to it, and I think that it will always be difficult for teams to break into it. Sometimes teams get lucky. Sometimes it's not luck. It's based off of other bits and pieces. But it's frustrating.
Okay, well, I want to pivot the conversation next back to Southampton. I want to talk about provisionally and potentially where we think our squad value is, or where the money might come from, what money we might get in the summer as we inevitably see a sort of tidal change in the ranks. But first, a message from our partners at Zencastr. Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description and learn more about Zencastr. Okay, so we are back, and yeah, it's pretty likely, Zach, that we're going to see quite a lot of movement in the summer one way or another. Where do you think the value comes from in the squad? Who's actually, where a lot of the focus from our perspective is going to be sort of shifting dead wood in a lot of cases? Are there any big surprising like money moves that might come that you think might be a surprise?
Well, there's the basics, right? There's Ramsdale.
Yeah.
There's
so I guess, do you think we'll make a profit on Ramsdale? Let's start with that as a question.
I'd like to think so. Depends on where he's going to go, right? I feel like anywhere he's going to want to go probably has the money to pay us slightly more than we have, and depends if he gets.
What was it, 21 million, 21.4 initial fee. Presumably none of the bonuses are going to be activated off the back of the worst season in Premier League history. So
I reckon you'll get someone to come in for sort of 25, but it depends whether or not we're considered to be sort of like an end of season cash out sale where everyone randomly decides that, they're going down, so quickly get all their players that want to leave. But like, I think if we get any money for say something, I'd like to keep Manning and James Bree. But if we ever got anyone that came in for them, bear in mind that they basically cost us nothing. I think that might be a little bit of a surprise if one of the clubs coming up decides to take a punt on them. That's just, I don't know, my spidey senses. Maybe if Sugawara ends up going to Napoli, I think that'll probably be a profit. We paid like 5 million for him. That will probably be, we're going to need to reinvest in that area because if we lose him as well, we end up with just James Bree right back at that point, right?
Yeah.
So,
presumably that's a position that we'll be wanting some sort of cover in.
Yeah,
some degree.
Maybe depends on where our strikers go. As you have talked about previously, the striker market is a hot commodity, and that means that the price goes up regardless of how good they are, right? Look at Carello, right? Barely scored a goal. Don't even think he did score a goal for us, right? And yet still, he was our club record transfer fee until Sulemana, and he wasn't very, very good. But then, teams always need strikers, and it doesn't matter what league they're in. I know that we've heard the Onuachu saga's gone on for years now, and apparently every club in Turkey wants him. So he might be more money than we'd expect to get for him if he goes. Apparently Archer still hasn't made up his mind, which I think me and you've had this discussion before, and I think a lot of what's being said in the press is more that they don't want to say they are thinking about next season because it implies they've downed tools.
It's just textbook media training. All of their answers were just textbook. Well, the focus is the next game, and any attempt to take anything further context from that is ridiculous because you're not going to get an answer anyway. He's not going to turn around and say, well, no, I don't want to be here, because there's every possibility he's not going to have a choice either way. If no one comes in, he's still here. So it's not as clear cut as you don't want to make a stink and end up in that situation. How many times have we seen that from so many examples? Not even just our club, right? Like the Saido Berahino springs to mind.
Good lord, that's
a bit of a throwback.
I'm pretty sure he's playing like League 2 now or something like that.
Yeah,
but he was playing in Cyprus last time I heard.
That's it.
Which, there's a lot, doesn't it?
I mean, I'm looking at our market value on transfer market, and it's I don't know.
Brereton Diaz has a option to buy for Sheffield United that looks like it's going to be profitable.
Yeah,
that might be a place we make a bit of money.
Right, good.
Aribo is probably not going to be sold for more than we paid for him, but I think that if he decides to go, which apparently he's very much wants a new challenge.
He's been here. I mean, I'm not surprised. He has been here through the worst of times, as well as sort of becoming a key part of that promotion drive last year. So it's been here, what, 4 years? Was it our relegation season that he signed for us? I think it was. Yeah, 22-23. So yeah, it's I don't know, what did we pay for him? Put 7 million. So yeah, I could see us turning a profit on that, or breaking even. I could see some clubs coming in for him for that money for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So but obviously I've given you my opinion. What's yours? Where do you think the value in our squad is? What do you think would be most surprising? Because obviously we can say the Ramsdales, we can say, who do you think might end up going that will throw us off? Again, like, I don't know how much Napoli might be willing to pay for Sugawara. That might end up being really profitable if he decides to go.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised to see, it's a bit of a left field one, maybe Jan Bednarek make a move.
Really?
I know that he's quite settled here. Yeah, I mean, and if that's the case, great, so be it. But he's an experienced international level defender. So I could see someone potentially coming in. Like you say, it really depends how much of a fire sale we end up in with ourselves. And if it came down to it, would we rather lose Bednarek to keep Harwood Bellis? Might be what it comes down to, right? Like Harwood Bellis is you would hope his value is only going to grow. When we signed him at the start of the season, I truly believed and hoped that was future Saints captain starting in the ranks. I know there's been some
that's the difficulty
whispers.
for me. right? Because the thing is that, more and more indictment of blah, 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 modern football. But trying to sacrifice another player to keep another player, I don't know how many years we would get out of Harwood Bellis if we keep him next year, we do the championship, say we come up again, or we don't come up again. And then we come up and some big club puts an offer in, we don't come up, and then a Premier League team puts an offer in, and then we lose him. And then we potentially lost Bednarek to try and make space for a player that might leave us anyway. But arguably, if you're applying the logic that I'm using here to any of the squads,
yeah,
it's difficult. And I think this is one of the biggest problems now with the way that contracts and back to just the way that football is when it comes to transfers is difficult to predict because contracts mean nothing other than it's slightly more expensive to get rid of a player. And for a lot of clubs, that isn't a problem. Or in our case, what we end up doing is giving someone a 5-year contract, and after 1 year, want to get rid of them. So then it becomes even more of a problem. So it's really, really difficult. But from a personal perspective, I think if Bednarek was going to go, he would have gone when Roma came in, because that would have been a big money move for him. And I think that he just doesn't really care and doesn't want to leave. Not really care about us. I mean, like, he doesn't really care about the outside noise. He's very much a Southampton player through and through, whether you like it or not.
And maybe that's the case. Well, what I'm taking from it, Zach, is that we're not really transfer experts, but it's going to be a very exciting summer.
It's like throw a dartboard, right? Because I would not have thought of all the players to go in January out on loan. I wouldn't have thought it was Adam Armstrong.
No, that really came out of the blue.
Nowhere. He's gone to West Brom. He's not had the best of times so far. Obviously, he went back to scoring ways, and then kind of has had a gap between then. But that really threw me left field. But then also, we were pretty convinced that they would stick with Russell Mountain through everything, which I think they did, right up until the point that 4-0 down after 25 minutes becomes untenable for pretty much any manager, unless you're Ralph Hasenhüttl. So,
yeah. Okay, well, that is just about all we've got time for today. The summer will be an interesting one, hopefully heading into a much more positive season next season. But we will be back next week with some actual Saints football matches. Crystal Palace coming up on Wednesday. We've still got one more episode to fill before we start thinking about match previews and crossovers, though, Zach. So we'll be back on Monday with some more Saints-related goodness. As always, Zach, thank you for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Let us know in the comments what you think. Where is the value in our squad that's going to make us some money to spend on someone who can score a goal? That is what we're aiming for, right? Let us know. We're on
Shane McAdams, why not?
Oh, no.
No, I'm not. I joke.
We are on Facebook, X, TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, YouTube on the GSPN Southampton channel, where you can catch all of our episodes and some shorter format versions. Give us a shout out, let us know. We'll be back on Monday. Until then, see you next time.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.